Begin the current daf, Mesechta Succah Daf Tazayin, begin 15 lines down at the top of the Yomim. We continue explaining the halacha of our previous Mishnah regarding how to make a valid sukkah and what's considered problematic of tasav lim na'aseh. Shir corresponds to Bakazik and Cheskah to end in Navachem Hashem joining us for today's daf. Should be a schus for Tinik ben Yehudis. Today we're discussing today's daf are what is considered a valid wall for a sukkah, what can be used for schach, how must the walls be placed to be valid, the concept of mechitza tzli materis, which is that even though it's a hanging partition, the wall doesn't go all the way down to the ground, it's still going to be admit as a wall. So we begin Daf Tazayin by the two dots, explaining the halacha of our previous Mishnah. They said, someone digs out in the pile of grain, thus making a wall and a roof. It's going to be a psul d'oraisa because of tasav lim na'aseh. You're not really making the walls and the roof. It's indirectly going to remain there when you dig it out. The Gemara makes an important qualification. Amaraf when this is loisha, we didn't learn that's going to be possible tasav lim na'aseh. El she'ein sham chalal tefach. There wasn't airspace of a tefach high, b'meshech, in the area of the length and the width of shiva of 7 tvachim, which is the shiur of the sukkah. And only after that did he go ahead and pile up and dig out in the pile that space. Oh, where now if it didn't have a space of a tefach when you were coming to dig it out, so now it's going to be coming schach by itself, but it didn't originally have a title of schach. It's only indirectly when you're digging out that it has the halacha schach. There's no schach, there's no roof. If you have something that's a big pile, there's no roof. When you dig out, by default, it's going to be a roof. But you didn't have an airspace of a tefach. But if, let's say, before you dug out, there was an airspace of a handbreadth along the length and width of 7 tvachim of that pile, that chalal tefach is an oil. The place discusses maybe there's Rabbi Shloimy from Daf Yud by the halacha of bein sukkah l'sukkah. If it's sukkah tefach sukkah, it's going to be a tefach. Place is not necessarily. But a tefach is an oil. So it comes out that pile, the grain on the top, before you even dug it out, it had a title of schach on it. So, because it already had the halal of tefach. When you subsequently dig out more and more, going down, until you make an airspace of a height of 10 tefachim, that's not making it into schach, because the only thing you're fixing in are the walls. The walls, Rashi explains, has no requirement of tasav lim na'aseh. So if you had an airspace of a tefach beforehand, and then you dug it out, made it higher, 10 tefachim, you didn't make the schach. The schach was there because it was covering an airspace of a tefach along the entire area of what a sukkah has to be. Oh, so then how is a sukkah? That's going to be a sukkah which was just less than 10 tefachim, and now you dug it out. Now you made the walls 10 tefachim. That's okay. That doesn't have a problem with tasav lim na'aseh.
The schach has to do with oil.
Yeah.
It's oil that is
right, it's a roof, it's a covering. Covering's only if it's on the oil. So it was a schach because it was over a tefach. But the walls it didn't have because it wasn't that, but that's okay. The walls could be tasav lim na'aseh. It says in the Brisa that it says if someone, the case of our Mishnah, someone dug out in a pile of grain to make a sukkah. So I raised a sukkah that's going to be a sukkah. The difficulty is, we learn in our Mishnah it says ain't a sukkah. How could the Brisa say it's a sukkah? And isn't it tasav lim na'aseh? Says the Gemara, obviously it's like Rav Huna, who says, yeah, the Brisa must be talking about that there was a halal of a tefach, and then you dug out the rest, Shema Minah, obviously it's like Rav Huna. Now, are those who, they don't say Rav Huna was explaining the Mishnah in, like saying, he wasn't qualifying the Mishnah. Rather, he posed a contradiction to Brisa on the Mishnah, and Rav Huna was part of the answer. The Tanan, he poses a contradiction. We learned our Mishnah, if someone digs out in a pile of grain to make a sukkah, it's not going to be a sukkah. By the time I learn the Brisa, I raise the sukkah, it's going to be a sukkah. And Rav Huna says, like, kasha is not difficult. The Brisa is talking about that it's kasha, because you had a little airspace before you dug out a height of a tefach along the length of a 7 tvachim. Our Mishnah is there was no airspace, so there was no oil, there was no sukkah, there was no schach, and now it's becoming a schach by default from tasav lim na'aseh. That's why it's going to be possible. Now continue on halacha, the next Mishnah, continue on the halachas of the walls of the sukkah. So I'm a shalshul defanis, which Rashi says anytime you're lowering something from top down, that's called shalshul. So if someone's lowering down the walls, milmalo lamata, what that means to say from top down is they started weaving the wall near the schach, and he's weaving and weaving, going downward and downward. And in gavoyim in the arch shleisha tvachim, if there's a gap, he doesn't end up completing the wall all the way down to the bottom. If there's a gap of 3 handbreadth, which is the amount of space that a kid goat could walk directly through, right underneath the walls, psula, it's going to be invalid sukkah. Now, but a milmata lamal, in contrast of, let's say he started weaving from the bottom on the ground, and he's going higher and higher. So im gavayas tvachim chair. If the wall is 10 tvachim high, it's going to be kosher, even though it doesn't reach the schach. So that's a discrepancy. Tanakama says, from top down, you won't be okay, even though you have 10 tvachim, you can't have a 3 tvachim gap. But from bottom up, yeah, you can have a 3 tvachim gap. As long as it's 10 tvachim high, it's going to be okay. That's the Tanakama. Rabbi and he disagrees. Says no. Shame shemulmata lamala sa tvachim. Just like when you're going from bottom up. When you're starting on the ground and you're going up, you the Tanakama agrees enough with a weaved wall of 10 tvachim. So too, from top down, it's enough when you're weaving 10 tvachim of a wall, even if it's very high off the ground, it's going to be kosher, because as Gemara is going to tell us, Rabbi Yossi holds mechitza tluya asara, a hanging partition, as long as it's 10 tvachim, it's going to permit the sukkah. So the Gemara explains, what is the machlekes between Rabbi Yossi and the Tanakama? Says the Gemara, Nasa Rabbi Yossi holds mechitza tluya materes. Yeah, even though it's a hanging partition, it still permits as a wall for the sukkah. But a marasam Tanakama held the mechitza tluya in the materes. It's not a wall. If you can have goats walking right beneath it, there's not a partition, not a separation of an area, and therefore it's not going to permit the sukkah. Now the Gemara wants to illustrate this machlekes with another Mishnah. It's not Hasan. Mishnah says over there, Mesechus Eruvin. Bar shebein shtei chatzeros. So we have a pit between 2 different courtyards. So half of the pit is in this courtyard, and half of the pit is in the other courtyard. You have a wall that separates the courtyards, which goes, and it's hanging essentially over the pit. Now, there's no opening in that wall between the 2 courtyards to make an Eruv together. No, they're 2 separate courtyards. And there's a wall, but again, the pit runs underneath the wall, as the picture illustrates over here. So the halacha is, ein memalim in b'Shabbos. You can't fill up water from this pit on Shabbos. Not this side people, not this side people, because the waters of this courtyard bring to the other courtyard. Essentially, if you're drawing water on one side, you're taking, which you're not allowed to carry, from the other courtyard, you can be carrying the water from the other courtyard's water. Ella imkain, unless if asla mechitza sar tvachim, that you made a special partition of 10 tvachim, beimel malu, whether higher up, beimel mata, whether lower down, meaning close to the water, bein b'taych ugnai, whether it's in the lip of the pit, which Rashi explains. What that really means to say is, b'taych ugnai is really qualifying milmala lamata, not exactly as is written here on the graph. Meaning, bein milmala means to say, whether you do it far away from the water, but it has to be within the lip of the pit. Why does it have to be in the lip of the pit? Because it has to make it obvious that the reason why you're making this mechitza is because of the lip of the water that's here in the pit. Because as the Gemara explains in Mesechus Eruvin, a mechitza tuluya, a hanging partition, will permit by water, because it's a leniency that Chacham made by water. But it has to be showing you that you're doing it for the water. So this is also mechitza tuluya, because it's not going down to the water, but it has to be teich ugni, it has to be in the lip of the water. Because in contrast, this mechitza that separates the courtyard and it goes over the pits too, which is also mechitza tluya, that wasn't made for the water, so that's not going to permit. Because Allah mechitza tluya being materes b'mayim only was made specifically to permit the water. For example, like when you have a certain porch over the sea, as the Mishnah says in Eruvin, that you make a mechitza tluya, you could have like these walls hanging down, and so that's like this case over here, where you're doing the lip of the pit. So whether you do it what's called milmala, higher up in the pit, or milmata, lower down in the pit, closer to the water, as long as b'teich ugna, as long as within the lip of the pit, that's going to be okay. But it's not going to go work with that regular mechitza you had in the courtyard. Shimon Lila, he disagrees. He actually says it's a machlekes, it's a contingent base. He says, Beishamai, I mean, the school of Shammai, they said, milmala, meaning, it's sufficient if you go ahead and you make the lip, you make the wall within the top of the lip, like which is really how the Tanakama said, as long as it could even be malmal. But if Basil says no, it has to be lower down, which Shay says all the Swarm have an opposite girsa, but either way, it sounds like Basil is being machmer. So the Tanakh going to give you two options. According to him, it's a machlekes Bisham Basil. Bisham says that it could be higher up, Basil says it's be lower down. Okay. But Omer Yehuda disagrees. He says no. He disagrees with everything we said up until now. He says, it can't be that this partition that you're talking about should be better than the wall that separates the courtyards. This wall that's made to separate the courtyards and is hanging over the lip of the pit, even though it wasn't made for the water, because he holds a mechitza teluya, a hanging partition, is permits by courtyards, even for all types of carrying. So why should it not allow you to carry the water? So he says, Rabbi Yehuda, B'shitas Rabbi Yisiyam, this Rabbi Yehuda, it says that you could use this mechitza teluya, this hanging partition over the pit that separates the courtyards, is going in the pit of Rabbi Yisi, who he holds, as we quoted just before, the mechitza teluya hanging partition will permit by a sukkah. They both allow high up mechitzas to view it as if it is a wall that's separating, even though it's hanging in the ear, even though there's large gaps. Here too, they both permit mechitza teluya. Meaning, if it's in the lip of the water itself, so that's not a regular mechitza teluya, that's already a certain clue they made by mind. But according to Yehuda, it's a regular mechitza, because I don't care that it's teluya and it doesn't go down to the bottom. Mechitza teluya permits, just like a BC permits mechitza teluya by sukkah. So on that says the Gemara, not true. Lo Rabbi Yehuda sub like Rabbi Yisi. Rabbi Yehuda does not necessarily hold like Rabbi Yisi that mechitza teluya should permit by a sukkah, and Rabbi Yisi sub like Rabbi Yehuda. And Yisrael is not necessarily like Yehuda that a pit should be permitted on Shabbos with a hanging partition. Why not? So the Gemara explained. Look at Yehuda, something like Rabbi Yisrael. Yehuda is not necessarily holding Rabbi Yisrael of our Mishnah, because Ad can come Rabbi Yehuda, and where do we find Yehuda over there in the Masechtas Eruvin permitting Mechitza Teluya is Ela Beruv Chatzeres. It's only by the laws of Beruv Chatzeres by courtyards where that's Dirabanan. This that you're not allowed to bring the waters of one courtyard to the other one without an Erev is rabbinic law, because according to Midday Raisa, it's only problematic of Rishus Yachad, Rishus Rabbin. Someone else's courtyard is not a Issa Deraisa. It's only Issa Rabbanan. So okay, for Issa Rabbanan, we'll be making with an halacha mechitza teluya. Halacha, but over here Sukkah Deraisa, halacha mitzvah is one of the tired mitzvahs sitting in the sukkah on sukkahs. So no, he wouldn't allow mechitza teluya. Not necessarily he would hold like a B'yezi, and the reverse I could also say is true. But Rabbi Yisi like Rabbi Yehuda, I wouldn't say necessarily Rabbi Yisi like Rabbi Yehuda, because Ad Kalan come Rabbi Yisi Hacha. Where do we find Rabbi Yisi over here in Masechta Sukkah that he permits the mechitza teluya? By sukkah, the mitzvah say it's a positive commandment to sit in the sukkah. But Shabbos is a skila. Shabbos is punishable when you do malacha deraisa for being stoned to death. So therefore, we're very stringent, even by its rabbinic law of Erevin. So therefore, maybe there we wouldn't say that you would permit mechitza teluya. So therefore, it's not necessarily, although we both find them saying the halacha mechitza teluya, not necessarily they would hold of each other, because you could say a stringency of one over the other. Now, says the Gemara, wait a second. The Imtam doing this and Rabbi Yisi does not hold like Rabbi Yehuda by the halachas of Shabbos. So Maisa Shanasa b'tzipari. So the story that happened with Tzipari, that they permitted on Shabbos to mechitza teluya, as Radim is going to say later on, apiminasa. According to whom was it made? Rabbi Yisi was the Rosh Hashiva of Tzipari, like the Gemara says on it says the pasuk Tzadik Tirdav, that you should go after a good bezdin. And one of the examples it gives over there is go after Rabbi Yisi and Tzipari. Wait a second. You just told me Rabbi Yisi only permits mechitza teluya by sukkah in our Mishnah, and not like Rabbi Yehuda regarding the laws of Shabbos. What do you mean? There's a story that happened in Tzipari where Rabbi Yisi was Rosh Hashiva, and they permitted mechitza teluya even on Shabbos. But you just told me it doesn't agree with you that we're going to mechitza teluya by Shabbos. So the Gemara says, it wasn't done to Rabbi Yisi because he had already passed away. LRP Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yisi. It was through his son, Shmuel Rabbi Yisi, that he held mechitza teluya helps even by Shabbos. Rabbi Yisi himself, I can tell you, he didn't necessarily hold Rabbi Yehuda. It could be he only held the mechitza teluya is materas b'sukkah and not by Shabbos. It says the Gemara, so what's the story that we proved that somebody in Tzipari, we thought it was Rabbi Yisi, he said no, it's the son of Shmuel Rabbi Yisi, that we find that the mechitza, they use the mechitza teluya even to permit haitzah on Shabbos. It says the Gemara, the Chi'asar of Dimi Amakut. Rav Dimi came, he said, one time they forgot in Tzipari, They forgot to bring the Sefer Torah from before Shabbos, which is Rashi gives the backstory that their custom was that they used to hide the Sefer Torah in someone's house because of the Gentiles. Now, that house that they put the Sefer Torah in was one of the homes in the courtyard of the Beis HaKnesses. Now, the thing is, there were many homes that opened up into the courtyard, and they didn't make an Eruv. So therefore, you couldn't carry from the home to the shul. Or a similar example, Rashi says, is that there were many courtyards that opened up into the same mavoi, which is just a larger context. And the shul opened up also to that mavoi. And the Sefer Torah was in the courtyard that was opposite the shul, and they didn't make a shituf and mavoi. So you're not carry from all the other chatzeros to the common mavoi. But Lamacher, the next day, what they did is, since they forgot to bring the Sefer Torah from before Shabbos, Pirsu Sadin al Gabi Amudim. What they did was, they spread out cloths on the pillars, which were there along the width of the mavoi, thus separating, as the picture somewhat illustrates, obviously not too drawn to size, but they had these pillars in the street, and they put like cloths over those poles, separating the mavoi. Now, there was nothing that was open from these mechitzas except the shul and the chatzar on the opposite side. So let's say this was the chatzar with the person's home that had the Sefer Torah, and this is the one where the shul is. So although there was many other chatzeros over here, but they had these poles, and what they did was they hung up curtains, now separating essentially, making the only things that opened up into this common area was the home where the shul was, was the home where the Sefer Torah was, and where the shul was, which the shul doesn't have to have an Eruv because there's no one who lives over there. And they the Sefer Torah, and they put the Sefer Torah because all the other courtyards were like, they're not here anymore, and there's no problem about carrying, because there's no one else but the home of where the Sefer Torah is.
Did they make an item?
They didn't have to make an Eruv because there's no one else.
What is this?
Oh, it's making mechitzas, making walls. It's separating, that we're not open up to the same common area. We're separated with walls. I don't have a problem by carrying, it's my own domain. Why not? So Taisa discussed about making mechitzas, is that a problem on Shabbos versus making a roof? But the assumption is, well, first of all, the Gemara has a different problem. For Karabai, and they read from that type. So the Gemara asked, here's the Succah Daf, you think they really went, they hung up curtains on Shabbos on the poles? So you would ask, and Taisa discusses that if the question would be, what do you mean? There's a problem about making mechitzas on Shabbos. But Taisa discusses if that's a problem or not, but the Gemara has a different question. The Gemara says, Mehechin Nevi'im b'Shabbos. The Gemara has a different problem. Forget about if you're making walls on Shabbos. You're not going to carry to put up those curtains. You're making it separation that now we could carry a Sefer Torah. How did you bring the curtains in the first place? To carry it there, to make the mechitzas, so that now you can bring the Sefer Torah. So the Gemara says, you're right, the story was different. They didn't actually bring the curtains on Shabbos. They didn't make it. Matzu Sadinen. They realized, they looked, and they saw that somebody had hung up laundry, hung up cloths, they were hanging on those pillars, which were elevated from the ground. So they were machitz tluyas. They were hanging, but someone beautifully had hung up these curtains, and they view Sefer Torah, so they brought the Sefer Torah and they read from it. So you see that they utilized machitz tluyas inti pyri. So that was the Gemara's question, saying, wait a second, you told me BC doesn't hold like a Yehuda. BC only permits machitz tluyas in our Mishnah of Sukkah, because only mitzvahs are saying. But by Shabbos, even though it's Erevin, which is the rabbinic, but since biblically you would get skila, he would be mathmer even by Erevin because of machitz tluyas. So, but this story happened in Tzipari. He was the Rosh Hashiva who permitted it. He said, no, he had already passed away, and it wasn't through him; it was through his son, Shlomo BC, who was in charge at that time, and he allowed machitz tluyas, even the laws of Shabbos were not necessarily BC. Now, continue on this theme regarding the walls for the Sukkah. So, I'm going to Chizdo Amar Avini. He says, Machzelas, a mat that is wide, arba umashu, 4 tvachim and a little bit more. That's again the width of it, which we're going to use for the height. Its length is like the length of the wall of the sukkah. So materis b'sukkah b'shum doifet. It's going to permit for a sukkah as a wall if it has again a width of 4 tvachim, a little bit more, which again that width we're going to use for the height of the sukkah because we're doing it perpendicular. And its length is the length of the sukkah. So you go, wait a second, hey Chaveh, how are you doing? How's a wall? I thought a wall has to be 10 tvachim high. How are you making a wall 4 tvachim and a little bit? So this is like where you have these halachic walls that are much discussed in this Masechta. It says it like this. So what you do is, you hang this wall in the middle of the wall. Now you have less than 3 tvachim from the bottom of the ground. You have less than 3 tvachim from the top of the sukkah. Anything that is less than 3 tvachim is like lavid, and therefore, as Rashi explains, we're talking about where the sukkah is exactly 10 tvachim. So 10 tvachim is the minimum height of a sukkah. So what you do is, if you're doing 4 and a little bit, so if you do the math, you're going to have exactly 10 tvachim, and that's why you need that mashu of the 4 tvachim. You're going to so that it's not 3 tvachim. It's going to be a little bit less than 3 tvachim on either side. So great, 3 and 3 is 6 plus 4 is 10, and they have love, and it's closed up. So therefore, you have a wall. Even though you only got a board, you went to the lumber yard. They said, "Sorry, we're all out. We only got this size." So great, no problem. You go to halacha and you say, "Love it." It's like it closed up, and therefore that's going to be a kosher sukkah. This is more pshita. Obviously, we know the halacha of love it. Says no, mountain. When you say chad love it, I mean we only say 1 love. Shnei love it. We don't say 2 loveds. Which tries to discuss this is what do you mean? We say when you have many sticks, you have many loveds. So he says maybe you'll be mechal between shasi and arev, and here it's arev. But be that as it may, that you would think that maybe you don't say 2 loveds, kamash malon, but yeah, you'll say loved once and you say twice, and therefore you can be closing up the sukkah with even such a wall. Now, however, the Gemara asks Mesvik, the Gemara asks from a brayso that seems to indicate not like your halachic chiddush. The brayso says machzela shiva masha. If you have a mat, a board that's 7 tvachim and a little bit more. Oh, that's my teres b'sukkah b'shuv, and that's going to permit by sukkah to function as a wall. What you see, obviously, is that you only say 1 level, not 2. Because why is the brayso telling me that it has to be 7 and a little bit? Obviously, it's saying that only 1 gap of less than 3 tvachim you'll say. Because why didn't the brayso just say, like we said, a bigger chiddush of 4 in the mashu? Why is the brayso saying shiva tvachim mashu? Obviously, you're wrong. Obviously, you don't say 2 levels. Because why would the brayso say the chiddush of shiva and mashu? Say 4 mashu. That would be even a bigger chiddush. Obviously, you're only going to say 1 level. Says the Gemara, no, Kitan Yahi, that brayso was b'sukkah b'doila, was by a very tall sukkah, where you cannot say 2 lavas. And that's why you need to have that the machzelas, the board has to be 7 and a little bit, and you have to put it either, again, according to Tanakama, within 3 tvachim from the ground, or you're going to put it, as our Gemara is going to explain, within 3 tvachim from the schach, where then it's going to be a mechitza of 10 tvachim, and then we don't care anymore that we got such a big gap on the bottom, because as the Gemara explained, my kamashal, so what's the chiddush of the brayso? We know you're saying 1 lavud. If the brayso is talking about sukkah gedayla, that you're saying lavud, what's the chiddush? The chiddush is the mishashim defanis malal lamat. The brayso is talking about that you're actually doing it from top down, and you're having a gap over here, and we're saying kirabiyasi that allows mechitza tluya to be materes by sukkah. That's where the brayso had to say talking about 7 in the mashu, because you can't say 2 sides. That's only the case we had over here that you could say 2 sides, because the sukkah, the schach is right here. But if the schach is a huge sukkah, it's got to be 7 in the mashu. Because then with 1 lavud, you're going to be able to say it's 10 in the mashu. And the chiddush should be, even though it's mechitzah tluya, it's going to be permitting. But you can't have 4. If you had 4 in the mashu over here, what would you do? You would leave it less than 3 over here, so that would make it 7 and a little bit. Then you wouldn't have any lavuds over here from the ground. And that's why the case of the brayso had to be 7 and a little bit.
How high could it be? What is the ratio from the bottom to the tzitliya?
It could be as high as whatever. It could be as high as you want it to be. Machitza tluya, he holds it's a partition, and you view it as if it's separating. Like we have the concept of good achas. You view it like as if it's going to be as a wall, no matter how high it is. Now another related halacha, but now going the other direction. Up until now we were explaining lavud in height. Now we explain lavud in the length. Amr Bami. He says pas, which Taisa explains interestingly, when we talk about the height, we call it a machzelas. When we talk about the width, we call it a pas. But it's the same thing. We're talking about a board. Machzelas is just mat, we call it when it's height, and pas is a board that we use it when it's along the length and the width. But pas arba mashu. If you have a board that's 4 tefachim and a little bit more, mata b'sukkah mishum doifen. That's going to permit a sukkah because there's a wall. Again, not the case we discussed before. It sounds like the same words. Meaning, if the sukkah is 10 tefachim high, and the width, meaning of the board, if the board is 10 tefachim high, and it's a width of 4 tefachim a little bit, that's going to permit as a wall for the sukkah. Now, how's that? You put it less than 3 tvachim near the second wall by the corner, and anything that's less than 3 tvachim near the wall is kalabadami. It's like lovid. So you can have a wall that's 7 tvachim. The measurement of a small sukkah is 7 tvachim, which is Kei Reish Rubai, the Shulchanai. That's the chiddush of this halacha that we're saying that this is also going to be a valid sukkah of the halacha of love. Thank you anytime for hosting us.